This is a meeting of the Shrewsbury Planning Board and the Grafton Planning Board. So I'm calling the Shrewsbury Planning Board's meeting to order. And I'll introduce my fellow members. We have Julie Holstrom, Perna Rayo, Dino Iliadi. That's it, because one of our other members had to recuse himself. And I'm Mo DiPaolo. Okay, Mr. Hassinger.
I'm Bob Hassinger, Chairman of the Grafton Planning Board. I'll call our part of the hearing to order. You want to introduce?
Mr. Robbins, our vice chair right now.
Present.
I am present. I'm Justin Wood, the clerk. Mrs. Bresnahan.
Present.
And on Google Meet for remote participation, we have our other member, Prabhu Venkatraman.
Present.
Okay, so I'll go quickly, any member comments?
No
Good.
comments.
Staff report?
No report this evening.
Okay. Now, we have a joint hearing this evening with the Grafton Planning Board for a proposed warehouse distribution facility, Shrewsbury at the site plan approval, Prologis, Inc., at 12 Centennial Drive, and the decision deadline is 90 days from the close of the hearing. So, Ms. Holstrom, would you like to read that book?
Sure. The book. The Shrewsbury Planning Board and the Grafton Planning Board will hold a joint public hearing on Monday evening, June 10th, 2024 at 7:00 p.m. in the Select Board Meeting Room at the Richard D. Carney Municipal Office Building, 100 Maple Ave, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and by remote participation to hear the application of Prologis, 1 Meadowlands Plaza, Suite 100, East Rutherford, Rhode Island, for site plan approval by the Planning Board to allow for construction of an approximately 845,500 square foot warehouse and distribution facility with associated accessory building to be located upon property known as 50 Centec Boulevard, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, consisting of presently vacant land totaling approximately 212 acres, approximately 54.2 acres in Grafton, and 166.2 acres in Shrewsbury. The site plan approval is required by the Town of Shrewsbury zoning bylaw, Section 7F3. The proposed development is shown on plans entitled UPS Centec Boulevard for site plan review, special permit, order of conditions, and stormwater permit 50 Centec Boulevard, prepared by Langen Engineering and Environmental Services, Inc., dated May 7th, 2024, consisting of 130 sheets. The subject property is located on Centec Boulevard in Shrewsbury and Centennial Drive in Grafton, and consists in whole or in part as parcels 55-001-001-000, 55-002-02, 55-002-004, and 54-001-000, and the Town of Shrewsbury Assessor's Map, and as parcels, come on, 00.5.0000001.E, 004-0000-0001.0, 012.0-0000-0015.0, and 011.0-0000-0046.0 on the Town of Grafton Assessor's Map. Copies of the application and all others are available for public inspection at the Grafton Planning Department, 30 Providence Road, Grafton, Massachusetts, during regular business hours, or the Town of Grafton website at www.graftonma.gov, at the Planning Department Development Projects webpage. Copies of the application are also available for public inspection at the Shrewsbury Planning and Economic Development Office, Shrewsbury Town Hall, 100 Maple Ave, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, during regular business hours, or on the Town of Shrewsbury website at www.shrewsbury.ma.gov on the Planning Board/Projects and Permitting webpage. There's a lot of zeros, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me,
I'm
Mr.
glad
Chair.
you don't have to read it over. Do you need to?
I was initially thinking we don't, but I do notice that we call out in our legal notice the zoning bylaws that apply, and it was not mentioned in yours, so I think we should read it.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Pursuant to sections 1.5.7, 1.3.3, 4.3, 3.2.3.1, 3.3.2.2b, 4.2.5.2, and 7.4D1 of the Town of Grafton zoning bylaws, the planning board will hold a joint public meeting with the Shrewsbury Planning Board on Monday, June 10th, 2024, commencing at 7 p.m. in the Shrewsbury Select Board's hearing room at the Richard D. Carney Municipal Center, Municipal Office Building, 100 Maple Avenue, Shrewsbury, Mass., to consider an application for a special permit and site plan approval for a major industrial complex proposing to construct a 845,500 square foot approximately warehouse and processing distribution facility located at 12 Centennial Drive, 105 Westboro Road, 105 Rear Westboro Road, and 36 Rear Nelson Street, Grafton, Mass., shown as Grafton Assessors Map 5, Lot 1E, Map 12, Lot 15, Map 4, Lot 1, and Map 11, Lot 46. Said property is located in an industrial, office light industrial, and water supply protection overlay zoning districts. The applicant is Prologis Inc., and the owner is BT Nuyo LLC.
Thank you. Okay. So, before we start the hearing, I don't know if you've done these before, but we haven't done a joint hearing before. So, what I think we're doing tonight is we're just going to have a general overview from the proponent, and then we'll discuss, we'll ask questions. If we get the appropriate time, we'll discuss a tentative future schedule. Right now, we're scheduled, each board's scheduled to have its own planning board meetings, which Mr. Hassinger and I think makes no sense. So we'll talk about that, but at least we can get an idea of what we'd be talking about in the next few meetings. Okay. Anything you want to add?
Well, we are doing these under different bylaws, under different applications. So the correct process for the hearings is a mystery. And we're doing our best. But I think the folks in Grafton would like to be able to come to the meetings without having to find their way into this building. It took me 3 doors to get into this building. I think I skipped one somewhere.
If we do joint meetings, we can do one at your place and one at our place.
And if we do it at our place, have you seen our place?
No. Oh, yes, a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, since it was remodeled into a proper room?
No, it was when Dan Magato was applying to be the town manager here, so
Yeah.
about 26 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I remember that was right after he was...
Okay, should we start? Okay, good evening.
Good evening, Chairman DiPaolo, Chairman Hassinger, and members of both the boards. My name is Mark Donahue. I'm an attorney with Fletcher Tilton, and I have the privilege of representing Prologis in this application. With me this evening to present a general overview of the development are representatives of Prologis, Ryan Kaminsky, Vice President, Art Macris, Senior Vice President, is also here, and Jonathan Scott, who is basically boots on the ground for this project, is also present and glad to answer any particular questions. On the side of civil engineering is John Perry of Langen Engineering, and he will review with you at a high level some of the site design as we go through it. And Robert Michaud of MDM Transportation is the traffic consultant that we have retained. First and foremost, let me thank both boards for accommodating a joint meeting. We're open to further meetings. It's totally up to whatever the boards desire at this point. But we greatly appreciate the opportunity to present to both boards at the same time so that there's no loss of communication in any fashion. The opportunity to develop this 212 acres that splits the town line is an exciting opportunity for both communities to expand its industrial tax base and to create a vibrant opportunity for new employment. The site, as indicated, is being designed for an 845,500 square foot regional distribution hub for United Parcel Service, which will service for a number of purposes. And basically, its purpose is to improve network efficiencies and relieve excess volume from existing hubs throughout the Northeast. It is a supplement to and not a replacement of the existing facility in Shrewsbury. The existing facility in Shrewsbury on Route 140 will continue to operate as a UPS facility even after this facility is built. The primary building does straddle the town line, as indicated. Approximately 30% is located in Shrewsbury of the building itself. There are also 3 accessory buildings that are located wholly within Shrewsbury, and Mr. Perry will review those with you. Both legal notices obviously outline the relief asked for. It's probably worth just summarizing why it's somewhat different. A warehouse or processing operation of this nature is a specially permitted use under the Grafton zoning bylaw. It is an as-of-right use or a permitted use under the Shrewsbury bylaw, provided that operation complies with the performance standards for industrial facilities in Shrewsbury. A portion of the site in Grafton is in the Grafton Water Supply Protection Overlay District. It is a relatively minor portion, but it does trigger the jurisdiction of the board for a permit under that particular provision of your bylaw. That is not applicable in Shrewsbury. The height generally in the district in Grafton is 35 feet, but the planning board has authority to grant relief up to 45 feet. This building is somewhere around 40.5 square feet, 40.5 feet tall. The limit in height in Shrewsbury is 50 feet, and therefore no relief is needed for that. And then finally, we're asking for relief to have reserve parking in Grafton. Grafton measures the quantity of parking necessary for this type of facility different than Shrewsbury. The parking proposed to be constructed exceeds the requirements of the Shrewsbury bylaw in any fashion. And then finally, each bylaw has as a requirement site plan review, which we'll be undertaking in some detail. As far as the site history is concerned, some of you might recall that United Parcel Service first came to town with regard to this site in 2018. At that time, it was investigating whether to purchase the property and entered into discussions with town leadership as part of its due diligence to move forward. Based upon that feedback from the towns in both communities, United Parcel Service, through a subsidiary, went forward with the purchase and began to contemplate the use of the property. That use was deferred in 2018 as other capital expenditures in the worldwide United Parcel Service chain had more pressing needs at that time. The need for the site in the Northeast continued to grow, and the project was revived in 2023, and Prologis was brought on board as the developer of choice by United Parcel Service. We began in the fall of 2023, once again, meeting with town leadership to discuss the process and understand what some of the concerns would be as we went forward in the design. We heard concerns from Shrewsbury that the original plan, the conceptual plan in 2018, had very little of the building located in Shrewsbury. And Shrewsbury leadership requested us to do everything possible to put some of the building into Shrewsbury so there would be some tax revenue because of what Shrewsbury perceived to be the disparate impact on the community, primarily due to traffic. The response to that is more than 30% of the building that we'll review this evening is now located in Shrewsbury. We were informed that both communities were then Shrewsbury's in the process. Grafton had a local wetland bylaw that both communities wanted the development to do its best to adhere by. The development has been designed, as Mr. Perry will review with you, in full compliance with both local wetland bylaws as far as setbacks from wetland resource areas. We heard pretty quickly that our primary concern was traffic. And we could understand that concern, particularly since the primary access for the truck traffic will be Route 20. We undertook then to retain MDM Transportation and Mr. Michaud because he is known to both communities. He has served as peer review consultant for both communities, and therefore has a credibility, but more importantly, his firm, either as peer review consultants or as developer consultants, has done a number of projects along both the Route 20 corridor and along the Route 30 corridor, Old Westboro Road, and therefore had a great familiarity with the areas that the project would be impacting. And we move forward in that. We have developed, as you'll hear from Mr. Michaud, both short-term and long-term plans or improvements that contemplated for the Route 20 Centec intersection. We've also evaluated the intersection of Pine Street and Route 30 in Grafton, and also have contemplated some improvements with regard to that moving forward. We heard that there was a concern, particularly in Shrewsbury, to not have this simply replace the Route 140 facility and be left with an empty building. We have assured, as I've indicated, Shrewsbury, that is not the intent. I would point out that United Parcel Service fairly recently just invested $1 million, gave it to the town in order to facilitate sewer expansion along Route 20 that would include that site. That will continue to be a UPS operating facility for the foreseeable future. So we have been working since the fall to try to meet those concerns in some fashion. As a result, we've got a fairly unique shaped building. It's not your typical kind of Lego thing. It's a little bit more spaceship kind of building that the development team has undertaken. We've had extensive discussions already with the shared peer review consultants of the town and with MassDOT with regard to Route 20 Centec Boulevard and our impacts upon that way. Our development schedule is somewhat aggressive. United Parcel Service is anxious to have this facility open. We are hoping to go through this process now in a fashion to as long as it takes in that fashion in order to start site work in early 2025. The goal would be to have the building essentially occupied in phases, not to wait for the entirety of the 845,000 square feet, to begin in 2026 with full occupancy in 2028. And we'll continue to move forward in that fashion. The purpose of this evening is really just to get an overview, so you have the information. We'd like to hear from you and obviously from the public, any areas that you particularly want us to focus on as we move into future projects or future hearings as we in the future in every fashion. Anytime you're doing a development of this magnitude, the developer is critical. You need to work with credible people. And I'd like to, with your permission, to have Ryan Kaminsky describe a little bit about the background of Prologis so you know the people involved. Ryan?
Yep, so a little hard to see on the screen, but Prologis is a publicly traded company with outstanding credit. We currently occupy and operate in 19 countries with 25 major markets as well. Most of our customers are Fortune 500 companies, and they retain us to build consistently and over throughout not only the States, but globally. Overall, we understand what it means to work with communities. You probably hear that a lot, but we've done this. We've done this multiple times with a lot of our major customers, and that's why UPS retained us to get onto this project. And I think really what comes down to it, and Mark alluded to it, and we'll get into some of the details, but we've demonstrated that over the last couple months in terms of how we've tried to lay out this property, avoiding the wetlands, and really working with UPS, going to multiple of their facilities, revising their prototype. So this is significantly outside of the means of what they typically do, and there were a lot of sacrifices on the operational efficiencies here. And what you're going to see tonight from a plan standpoint is a plan that is as balanced as possible, that meets both, that gets as close as possible to the fulfilling the town's requests and then also the operational requests from UPS. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the prototype that we have today is not ideal. It really is not ideal for the customer. They would they would have preferred the larger box that was originally presented, I believe, back in 2018. But in order to get this through and really keep it in the town and the two towns here, this is what we're presenting tonight, which you'll see, and I'm going to turn it over to John at that.
Thank you, everyone, for accommodating this meeting for us. Again, I'm John Perry from Langen, site civil engineer. Langen's not only the site civil engineer, we're also the surveyor, geotechnical, and landscape architect for the project as well. Been working with Ryan and team on this for many months now, so we're excited to be here to present the plan. And as Mark mentioned before, the goal is to keep it somewhat high level tonight. I'm an engineer, so by nature I try to, I tend to get into the weeds a little bit, but we're going to get into the weeds in subsequent hearings, I think, after tonight. So I'll go through and give you just a taste for the site plan. So starting here is the location plan, and I assume everyone knows, where this project is going to be. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page and everyone can see it in context, up here, I think everyone can see my cursor. Yep, my hand here. So about 0.6 miles north of the site, or up Centec Boulevard, is Route 20, which is where the existing UPS facility is located. We are bound on the south by the commuter rail, with the Grafton commuter station just south of our property here. There are, there's a transmission easement that goes through the site, and Summit Brook bifurcates the property, so you can kind of see Summit Brook here as well. So we always kind of look at this site as two areas. It's one parcel, 220 acres, as we mentioned before. But as you can see, the western portion of the site is, again, bifurcated by Summit Brook, so that's not really included in the development area that we'll be showing you. The development area that we've limited this project to is approximately 150 acres on the eastern or northern portion of the site, as you can see here. So this is an existing conditions plan, and it is a challenging site. As Ryan mentioned before, we spent a lot of care making the site and the building work around the site. I'll get into that in a few minutes. But this is the development area. The thick black line is the property boundary, and these shaded light blue areas are wetlands. So there are multiple wetlands on site. There are bordering vegetated wetlands. There's a little isolated wetland pocket here as well. This is the town line, just to give you an idea for where each item is that I'm pointing to, whether it's in, this red line is the town line, so north of that is obviously Shrewsbury, and then south of that is Grafton. There's this inundated area associated with Summit Brook, which comes down here and eventually flows into Bummit Brook to the south. This has been inundated, and currently it, is more of a pond, where the center line of the stream is more in the middle here. This yellow line is the floodplain, so there's a 100-year floodplain associated with that. With each wetland area, there's also no build buffers, so the purple represents the no-touch buffers of those wetlands, and the green, I know it's a little hard to see there with the background, represents the 100-foot jurisdictional buffer. And there's also multiple zoning lines here on site. In Grafton, we're in the industrial and office light industrial district. There is a small portion of residential R20 up in the western portion of the parcel, which again is not included in the development area. In Shrewsbury, we're in the limited industrial And again, there's a very small piece of rural B here, just north of the transmission line, again, not included in the development area. So all of the proposed site features are in the limited industrial, or office slash light industrial. Not shown here, because it's obviously a two-dimensional plan and a little hard to see, is the site topography. It is a challenging site from a topographic standpoint. There's about 140 feet of vertical differential on the site, with the low-lying areas at around elevation 350 and the highest points at around elevation 490. So I'll talk about grading a little bit in a few minutes here, but as you can imagine, there was definitely some interesting grading. We've been on site, our geotechnical group has been on site, and we've done about 100 test pits and borings, so we have a good understanding of the soil conditions. In general terms, there's glacial till, sand, there are ledge outcroppings, there are shallow ledge occasionally, so for the most part, down in the low-lying areas near the inundated wetlands, wetland area here, there's some good sandy material, and the rest of the site is a little more of a shallow ledge condition. Okay, so this is the site rendering, this is the site plan, and this is just kind of zoomed in. I'm going to go back one slide for a second to orient you here. So this is just zoomed in on this eastern portion of the site, which we're calling the development area. And, as we've said a few times before, we did spend a lot of care on the site plan. Usually the building drives the site plan. In this case, it was the opposite. The site drove the building design. And we worked with the tenant, UPS, and the architect, and the whole team to come up with a building footprint that would work for this site. As Ryan mentioned before, where this started over a year ago was a larger building that had more of an H shape to it, but it required wetland impacts, required impacts to the buffer zones, and we really wanted to see if we could think outside the box and come up with a better plan to eliminate any wetland disturbance, direct wetland disturbance to the bordering vegetated wetlands, and maximize open space. And we think we've done a good job of doing that. There is one small, as I mentioned before, an isolated wetland pocket here, located on the Grafton side, that would be required to be filled in. So we're going to fill and replicate that. It's about just under 7,000 square feet. It's not jurisdictional under the state bylaws or the federal regulations. It's only a locally jurisdictional wetland, and we've discussed that with the Conservation Commission and their peer reviewer already in informal hearings, and we'll get more into the detail with Conservation, which is scheduled to be next Tuesday. Just kind of going through how this site is going to be used. The building is really a combination of a delivery center and a distribution hub. So there will be both the brown delivery trucks that you see, delivering packages to your homes on this site, and larger trucks that will be delivering products to the site for delivery, and then also shipping products out to other distribution hubs. So we have a dedicated truck entrance on Centec Boulevard, shown here. We can see my hand waving. Trucks and delivery vans will enter through that location. There'll be a guardhouse here. They'll drive through generally in a counterclockwise manner, just to have good traffic circulation. the brown package cars or delivery vehicles will actually be inside of these thinner wings of the building. So the more wide area of the building is where the packages will get offloaded from trucks. They'll be sorted, and then they go out to these more narrow wings, where the brown trucks will be inside. They'll load up packages inside, and then they'll go out for delivery from there. And as you can see around the main warehouse area, there's also truck staging and parking for tractor trailers that are either waiting to be unloaded or will be there for kind of a temporary short period of time. In this kind of the main area of the site here, there's also going to be a few small ancillary buildings. There's a small maintenance building where they can do tire changes, and if there's a broken mirror on a truck or something like that, right? So there's a small maintenance building here. There's a wash tunnel. So UPS is really big on having their trucks, looking good. You don't ever see a dirty UPS truck driving around. So there's a truck wash station here. It's also great for getting a little bit of snow off of there and whatnot. There's a fueling area. This is probably going to be a combination of diesel fuel and compressed natural gas. Again, used for the fleet vehicle fueling. And then here is the employee entrance, which brings me to the employee parking, and they will access the parking lot to the south here from Centennial Drive. There's a completely separate access point for the employee vehicles and the trucks. So the two traffic components will never mix on site. So we have 830 employee parking spaces proposed. They will access the building through a ADA accessible path. It's a little hard to see here, but they will walk through an ADA accessible path to that employee entrance building, which is essentially a security checkpoint. It's a formalized building with security guard in there. They'll have to go through there, show their ID badge, and then they can go into the building. As Mark mentioned before, the building itself does vary in height a little bit, and let me get to that in a minute. Apologize. While I'm on the site plan, I'll mention just briefly the grading. Again, there is, we want to keep the site as a safe and functional site. So all the truck driveways and truck parking areas will be graded between 1% and 4%, give or take. So the whole site will be, somewhat flatter, obviously, than the existing condition. Thus, there'll be a handful of retaining walls around the site, as we're trying to minimize any disturbance to wetland buffers and existing natural vegetation. So rather than having large slopes that would create more disturbance, we've opted to utilize retaining walls, which have obviously a cost premium to them, but we thought it was important to maintain the existing environment to the maximum extent we can. We've been in contact with all of the utility providers, and they've confirmed that there is service available in capacity as well. So this is why I wanted to just pause on my where I started to go down and talk about the building height a little bit before, because the slide's better to do that. The wider portion of the building, which is the sortation area, That does have a bit of a higher ceiling height there, where the thinner, more narrow wings are a bit lower. So on average, the building height is 40.5 feet. Hence why we're requesting a special vote on the building height. These arrows here, just wanted to show quickly, is where the brown delivery vehicles would enter and exit the site. So there's multiple locations to get in and out of this building here. So stormwater is obviously a very important component of any development. And we understand very well that both towns, Shrewsbury and Grafton, both have a local stormwater bylaw that has a higher treatment requirement than the state standard. So we are meeting the 90% total suspended solids removal and the 60% total phosphorus removal. And the way we're doing that is through a mixture of surface infiltration basins, extended detention basins, bioretention areas, otherwise known as rain gardens. We do have some subsurface infiltration and detention in the typical deep sump hooded catch basins and water quality units. And we're also meeting all the peak flow rates that we need to, and we'll get way more into the weeds on that in subsequent hearings. We have a very robust planting plan. We're using all native, drought-tolerant plants. This slide, focuses in on the employee parking where we have more deliberate islands and things of that nature, but we've also spent a lot of care trying to maintain existing natural buffers as well. As you can see here, this is a photograph along Centec Boulevard where we've tried to maintain a nice, thick, dense, green vegetated buffer as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Bob to speak about traffic.
Let me just tee Bob up. In 2018, when United Parcel Service was looking at the site, part of that diligence involved deep dive into traffic and understanding the permitting. As part of that diligence, United Parcel Service met with MassDOT, had specific meetings with Shrewsbury about it, and so certainly knew about the issues that were perceived out there, and also part of it. The Route 20 corridor plan, which MassDOT completed, of basically Shrewsbury line to the north, all of Shrewsbury from Worcester to Northborough, the overall master plan, so to speak, contemplated the United Parcel Service building off of Centec Boulevard at the Route 20 intersection. So it's been on the radar for a while, and for all the reasons I indicated before, we've retained MDM and Bob Michaud to review it. So Bob?
Great, thank you, board members. Again, for the record, Robert Michaud, Managing Principal of MDM Transportation Consultants. As both boards are aware, we've had vast involvement in projects, both from a peer review perspective as well as from representing specific developer-sponsored projects. And the outcome of some of that work is in fact now incorporated into the master plan of Route 20, right? Portions of which have either recently been completed in the Edgemere area, for instance, in the westerly portion of Route 20, or more recently, the allocation of some almost $20 million to the easterly portion of Route 20 from South Street to the Northborough line, right? So we're very familiar with the history, the evolution of the corridor, and of course on the Grafton side, we are well versed on the Route 30 corridor issues, having done peer reviews there as well, and mixed-use development peer review at Green Street as well on the Grafton side. What I'd like to do is, at a very high level, knowing that we're going to go into a lot more detail in a subsequent meeting, both with Shrewsbury and Grafton, is just to hit the very high points of what we've determined to be impact for this project. I will foreshadow that by saying that we have been actively engaged in discussions with MassDOT to ensure that they're aware of the project. Mark had alluded to some prior discussions with DOT beginning in 2018. There's been a whole evolution of projects along the Route 20 corridor, and an evolution, in fact, of this very project that required a refresh, if you will, to understand where we are today in terms of ground conditions, traffic operations, actual built projects or projects that will be planned, including this. So, at that high level, if, John, you could just advance one. Our study, which is dated to May of this year, really began in the fall of last year, beginning with understanding the ground conditions in November of 2023, what volumes existed in the corridor, and I'll wait for John to advance to the...
Hi, Bob, I think I'm frozen here.
While John's doing that, the four principal points that we're going to present are, first, a context for the site, how the site sits relative to Route 20 and Route 30, to describe some of the improvement initiatives that I just very briefly touched on, really being driven through a collaboration between DOT and the town. We'll then turn our attention to how much traffic we expect this specific project to generate, and end with some of the objectives that are now built into the project to ensure that the project's properly planned for. John had mentioned the proximity of the site relative to Route 20 at about 0.6 miles away. We're, in fact, a bit closer to the Route 30 corridor itself, but certainly the gateways, we call them, not only include the endpoints of Centec Boulevard on the Shrewsbury side, but also the Route 30 corridor side as a principal gateway. Beyond that, we've also taken a look at gateways, major intersections along the Route 20 corridor that would include everything from the Lake Street area, which is west of the property, to South Street to the east. The South Street, Green Street intersection happens to be the point, the starting point, if you will, for the current initiative to improve Route 20. It goes from that point to the Northborough line. And what's shown on the screen right now is an aerial diagram that would indicate with red dots each of those gateway study locations that were included in the study relative to where the site sits. And John, if you could advance one slide. The context of this is important to understand. What's shown here is in green the Route 20 corridor, and there are several hatched out areas or shaded areas that indicate either recently completed infrastructure improvements in the Edgemere area, for instance, on the west side of Route 20. Those are now in place. And to the far east, a current project, just about around $20 million project that runs from Green Street to the Northborough line. And you'll also see another project in Circle at Route 140 and Route 20 that's currently under evaluation by DOT for enhancement to that whole interchange area. What's not yet funded or specifically planned is the central corridor of Route 20 in the Centec vicinity. So we spent a lot of time looking at and understanding how that currently functions and what its needs are, not only from today's perspective, but from the perspective of what other projects are likely to be built, either because they've been recently improved or are in the planning process. And the next slide will illustrate some of those projects that were considered in our study as we were trying to frame the issue for that primary impacted location of Route 20 and Centec Boulevard, as well as projects on the Grafton side, on the Route 30 side. And you'll see that there are a number of projects. On the Grafton side, we've got an industrial development at 124 Westboro Road, the GFI project, 200,000 square feet of industrial development just to the west of where the southerly gateway intersection is. 2 residential projects in Grafton at Institute Road and and Alfonso Village. And finally, a mixed-use development very close to the property, actually, almost directly opposite the Grafton Street Station, Grafton MBTA station rather, large mixed-use development. On the Shrewsbury side, we've got, of course, Edgemere, which is substantially complete now, but has a balance of 50,000 square feet of retail space yet to go. The Point at Hills Farm, which is a combination of industrial and residential use. Centec Park North, which we've actually worked for the town of Shrewsbury on, immediately to the north of this property along Route 20, and the Emerald Run 40B project along the Green Street corridor. So these projects are very much in the mix. These are real projects either in process or recently approved or recently built, all of which are going to place additional traffic pressures on Route 20. The next slide, John, will show the proximity of those various projects to this site as well as to the principal impacted location at Centec Boulevard, Cherry Street, and Route 20. The next slide provides a snapshot of what additional trips that combination of background projects is going to add to the Route 20 corridor. And what's interesting when you look at this, and this is a very simplified schematic of what these volumes represent, with Route 20 going from page left to page right, Cherry Street on the top, Centec Boulevard on the bottom, is that you'll see a rather substantial increase in through traffic on Route 20. About 100 additional through vehicles traveling east in the morning as part of a commuter period, and about 55 vehicles traveling westbound during that same period, about almost 50 on Centec Boulevard, and fewer on Cherry Street 10. The next slide shows the weekday evening equivalent. This is the evening commuter hour. You'll see that the volumes are even larger for these projects, about 117 additional through vehicles traveling west in the opposite direction as they're returning back to the local community, 82 traveling east, almost 60 on Centec Boulevard and 12 on Cherry Street. So these are the volumes that we know, independent of this project, are going to be placing additional need for infrastructure or potential improvements on Route 20 to augment those that are already in place or recently completed. So the next slide, if you could advance that, really frames some near-term objectives that we've identified in discussions with Shrewsbury, understanding those additional pressures that exist independent of this project. First and foremost, that major gateway at Route 20 and Centec Boulevard really needs to be updated to respond to these new traffic patterns. And that would include a revisit and a refresh of how the lanes are currently designated. They really do need to be updated to reflect these new patterns. We also need to optimize how the signal functions. It's been some time since that's been retimed to adjust to those patterns. And the objective really is to achieve an acceptable operating standard from the lens of how DOT, Mass DOT, looks at projects and operations. So those are really the objectives. And to achieve those objectives, Prologis has been engaged in discussions with the town to understand where the town stands in their planning efforts to try to address some of these pre-existing issues, and how ultimately this project may actually facilitate and leverage those improvements over time. So the next slide presents an overview of near-term improvements at the Route 20 and Centec Boulevard intersection. And without going into detail, because we'll have more time to do that at a subsequent hearing, what this really shows is the reallocation of lanes on the north to south movements, particularly for Centec Boulevard and Cherry Street, where today exclusive right turns predominate, but they're not lined with where the volume actually exists. We want to convert those right turns to through lanes, through right turn lanes, and to take what are today through left turn lanes and convert them to exclusive left turn lanes, and to retime the signal. And with those types of improvements in place, we can achieve the operating standards that DOT would consider acceptable to address those pre-existing approved or yet to be built projects that I just mentioned. So that's really a town initiative at this point that would be necessary to achieve that operating standard that DOT really is looking for. Now, with that as a background, certainly this project is going to add its own amount of traffic, right? So let's talk about that a bit. At the next slide, really is, there are a lot of numbers here, but what I want to impress on both boards is that industry standards are often applied to projects like this from sources like the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual, right? That's standard protocol. This is not a standard project, and you can't find a land use category that very specifically accounts for the type of operation that's being proposed here. And in those circumstances, it's incumbent on a developer to quantify what those trips could look like by looking at similar facilities. We call that, empirical evidence. In this case, we identified, in concert with Prologis and UPS, two very recently built and fully occupied facilities that nearly mirror what's being proposed here. They're located in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Plainfield, Indiana. We've got a total of 96 hours worth of data from the combination of facilities that allow us to see on an hour-by-hour basis how many vehicles, how many trucks, how many pedestrians, how many bicycles, everything under the sun, how many vehicles are being generated by these facilities. And we can then apply those to this facility as a good starting point to understand how much more traffic might be generated. So what's shown in the far right of this board are the total combination of trips that we would expect during the highest 1 hour period, during a commuter period in the morning, and again in the evening. They're shown in blue. You'll see that in an entering movement, all vehicles coming into here would total of 172 total inbound trips, and under 100 leaving the facility during that same period. One of the factors that's important to understand, again, subject to a subsequent hearing, is that these facilities are driven by shifts, right? These are facilities that operate on multiple shifts, and that include a specific accounting for how package trucks in particular leave the facility, so that they're not leaving during a period which is known to have a high volume, right? Usually that happens after 9 in the morning, where substantial reduction in overall area volumes is occurring. So these blue volumes really represent the empirical evidence applied to this case. The numbers are quantifiable, but as we've presented in our traffic report, and I'll highlight some of that in a moment, these volumes are very manageable within the context of the Route 20 corridor from two perspectives. One, the recently improved portions of Route 20, which can easily handle this additional volume. And the near-term improvements that I just described, the town-sponsored improvements, once implemented, would also be able to accommodate these types of increases and still work at an acceptable standard. You'll see that these trips are broken down into employee trips. These are standard passenger vehicle trips. That accounts for the vast majority of the vehicles that are generated, but also the package trucks, the small package trucks, and the articulated or tractor trailer vehicles are also annotated here. And if you focus on the truck activity, to give you a sense, in the weekday morning peak hour up to and including 9 in the morning, those package truck trips are rather modest, frankly. They are specifically programmed to occur after 9 in the morning. So you'll see very little activity in the morning, whereas in the afternoon you've got some of those vehicles starting to arrive, but most of those arriving after 6 and typically closer to 7 p.m. at night. So you'll see also a rather modest volume associated with the package trucks. So those go from 16 trips to 44 trips during these peak hours. Articulated trucks, the trucks that are making regional delivery of product or accepting regional input from regional locations, about 30 to 50 trips total per hour. If you look at that directionally, that's about one arriving truck every 4 to 5 minutes in the morning, and a bit higher in the evening hours. Between 4 and 6, you might see one truck every 2 minutes. right? So that's the level of activity that we're expecting to see. To put these in context, the next slide provides more of a snapshot, very high-level volume summary of how these volumes get distributed on area roadways. You'll see the same study map that I started with, but you'll also see very large yellow arrows on these diagrams. And those large arrows are the additional trips that we would expect this facility to add to various sections of road. And if you focus on Route 20 and you look to the west, the far west, you'll see that these volumes, become very manageable, quite frankly, and that they generate on the order of about 20 to maybe 30 total trips per hour by direction, and the same to the east. On the Route 30 side, a similar story, right? We're talking about peak travel direction of about 15 to 30 vehicle trips per hour on these extremities of the study area. Of course, those cumulatively will add up and impact the primary gateway at Route 20 and Centec Boulevard. If you advance one slide, John, there's an evening equivalent to these volumes. These are a bit higher, but in the same order of magnitude. And the next slide really kind of puts a better lens on what this really means at the principally impacted location. That's Centec and Route 20. What's shown here, again, in a very similar way to how we showed the background traffic volumes, is how many additional vehicles by movement would occur as a result of this project. This is a weekday morning. You'll see that we're not adding any through traffic to Route 20. Unlike the background projects, what we're really doing is introducing turns onto Centec Boulevard, principally from the west, traveling eastbound at about almost 70 vehicles per hour. It's about a vehicle a minute. And 34 left turns an hour, about 2 vehicles a minute coming in, making a left turn to get to Centec, and about 26 vehicles coming from the Cherry Street area, about 1 vehicle every 2 minutes. Leaving the facility, we've got a similar and relatively low number, 38 left turns, 14 through, and 19 rights. They're not volumes that are going to independently change the dial, if you will, on how that signal works. And they're very manageable. In fact, can be accommodated within those near-term improvement capacity enhancements that I mentioned. The next slide is the PM equivalent to that. These are higher volumes, but again, we're not introducing through traffic on Route 20. We're introducing turns onto Centec Boulevard. About 120 right turns an hour, traveling east, about 2 vehicles a minute, and about 60 left turns an hour, about a vehicle a minute making a left turn. 45 from the Cherry Street, that's less than 1 per minute. And then when we look at vehicles trying to get back to the Route 20 corridor, the highest volume is a left turn at 73, a little more than a vehicle a minute, 27 north and 37 right turns. So very manageable numbers. And it really puts a lens on what this project is relative to other area initiatives and projects. This represents about a 5 to 10% change in the capacity, if you will, of the intersection. Very manageable. Next slide. From an operations analysis perspective, the next slide, we know that all of the locations that we've studied are currently or will operate at acceptable standards as they're defined by industry standards. Within Shrewsbury, that means level of service D or better operation. That is the standard that we're held to by DOT. On the Route 30 side as well, there's ample capacity to accommodate this use. We will point out, and this was subject of peer review as well on industrial properties in Grafton, is that while this project introduces what is essentially a nominal change in critical movements at the intersection, there are aspects of the Route 30 intersection that have longer delays, left turns in particular onto Route 30. So we're aware of those, and in the course of a more detailed presentation, we expect to have a conversation about how that might be monitored over time and whether or not a signal at some point might make sense. on the Route 30 side. The next slide, if you could advance one more, John, provides a recap of what our current objectives are. And essentially, although it'll show in a moment, first and foremost, as we're looking at the site, and we've been planning the site, we want to ensure safe and efficient access. And it's in context with other industrial uses that are actually in that area. This is an industrial property. It will have separate truck access, as John mentioned. It will have separate passenger vehicle access. So there's a physical separation of those two aspects of the property. Transportation infrastructure within Shrewsbury is substantially in place or being planned and is funded, but there is a need in the longer term for other physical improvements to take place, not directly related to this project, but more in line with the quarter study findings, there were 20 study findings. And to that end, we expect there will be additional discussion on a funding contribution by this project to help those longer-term improvements come to fruition. And finally, I'd mentioned the Route 30 corridor and monitoring it to determine the need for any kind of signal control over time that may be an outcome not only of this project, but a number of projects that cumulatively are adding up. All right, so that's the general overview, very high level. Didn't want to bore you with the details. More to come. Back to Mark.
So just touching on some issues outside of the direct technical points, focusing particularly on the economic impact of the site. The purposes of having industrial zone land in a community is to increase the tax revenue of a town and create diversity in a tax base so that the town can benefit from that year over year. It's also to create employment opportunities. This project touches all of those bases plus some. On a conservative basis, the total expenditure by Prologis and United Parcel Service will exceed $175 million in either building or in personal property within the building. We have already had initial discussions with both assessors about a collaborative effort on assessment of that property and the valuation, and then each town would apply their own applicable tax rates to the portions as ultimately determined. So it is a reoccurring, continual, material increase to the tax revenue for both communities. The employment opportunities are also significant. United Parcel Service expects, in addition, as indicated before, to the Shrewsbury facility, to generate more than 1,000 full and part-time positions when full operation of the building begins in 2028 and thereafter. There may be a perception that those are low-level positions, many of those. That's far from the case. It was a fairly publicized effort with the Teamsters to come to a new agreement last year with the United Parcel Service on that. And United Parcel Service has indicated that their full cost of employment for a full-time hourly employee exceeds $97 an hour, the vast majority of that being in wages. So these are good jobs. Anecdotally, I can tell you that almost everybody I've talked to at United Parcel Service at this level working on this, including the regional head in Eastern United States for real estate, began at UPS online in some fashion. So it is a place that people have benefited for a number of years in Shrewsbury and would continue to benefit from. That's our high-level overview of the project. We do suggest that moving forward, whether it's continued joint meetings or separate meetings, that each meeting have a particular topic so we can focus on that. We can make sure peer review's ready to focus on that to make it expedient, your time most efficiently. We benefit from your staff, both Mr. McGoldrick and Mrs. Coughlin have been very cooperative. We now have peer review consultants involved. They, in fact, have been involved even as we met on 30% design reviews with each town staff, including public safety, to make sure that we had incorporated in the final plan initial comments and concerns. And peer review consultants have been involved in all of that. We have submitted, obviously, Mr. Michaud's report. We've submitted the stormwater report, the plans, and everything else. To come is a sound analysis, which will still be coming. And obviously, we would expect that the towns hopefully would share in a peer review consultant of that work once it's prepared and be able to review all of that work in the future. And so we look forward to working with you in whatever format works for the board. I can assure you it'll work for the development team. And glad to hear of any particular concerns that you want to make sure we address in the future. And finally, thank you very much for your time and effort.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before I open this up to everybody else, if UPS wants the configuration the way it originally was, and they want to put it in Shrewsbury, we're all for it. Okay, so,
Mr. Chairs?
Mr. Hassinger, do you have any questions?
Oh, maybe a few. You could put it all in Grafton, too. In fact, that was sort of what I remember from back, whatever, 18, 19, which takes me also to, back then I had the impression that we were being told that it was almost all tractor trailers and it wasn't hardly any of the, what do you call them, trucks or vans that you have over in Route 140. Now it sounds like that split is maybe different, and that makes a difference, at least in my impression of where cars are going to go. I'm afraid that I can't read that from here, and I certainly didn't see whatever pointing you were doing, and you don't have any north arrows on those, which helps that and really make it really clear where the town line is, helps a lot too. I hope that we have, or we will have in our record, this set of slides, so
Absolutely.
we can see them, and all the folks back home can see them. The one area that I suspect more than one of us is concerned about, though, is in Grafton, the Route 30 Pine Street intersection, because there's so much activity going on there, development. Some is already being done, others is yet to come. And just recently, we had a traffic study for one of them that actually said that the left turn onto 30 was at F already in the morning. I don't remember, but it was one of the portions of the day. And I'm worried for the town about each of these incrementally coming along, and I'm not sure that what we saw tonight includes all the ones that are happening or are going to happen. And we'll end up with the town can't afford to signalize that intersection. But I think people already are complaining about the left turn, and they haven't heard anything about this one yet. So that'll be something I'll be interested in.
That's a fair point, and I know Mr. Michaud's already done a fair amount of research on it. We'll be prepared to review it in detail.
I think just one comment for tonight. I know we'll probably have a lot more questions as we get farther into it, but yeah, on the topic of traffic, the future projects list you have is missing one project that just recently came into the permitting process, and that's on 5 Millennium Drive. It's 233 residential units, so if you're not already aware of that very definitely, that I think was the project that Bob was referring to. We just looked at the traffic study for that recently, but that is one significant project that needs to be factored into that. Other than that, I can't think of any other significant projects that aren't already on your list, but that one needs to be included.
Is
That,
across the street from the drive?
8 Pine Street, he's got that on the list, Village of Grafton Woods.
yep. The one you just talked about is a 40R, and the traffic study was done by Ty and Bond. I'm sure our staff can get the study to you guys.
I think
It was recent enough that I would not have expected to see it on your traffic study that started working out in the fall, but is still one thing that's notable.
We talked about it on the way in through the parking lot. So we needed to include it.
Yeah,
so.
I was aware, and it only literally 2 or 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
you know, it became apparent to us that it was being proposed. And so it will be accounted for. You know, I have not seen the tie and bond traffic report for it, but certainly they will have, you know, had their own traffic counts conducted, and
Yeah.
that'll provide a nice basis for us to do some
Yeah,
comparisons.
that report is available on our website.
Yes.
You shouldn't have any trouble getting a hold of it.
No, I
And
have an
think
avenue for that.
our peer review of that is underway. I don't think it's complete yet. Or maybe it is. Maybe it is.
The information shared. So.
Yeah.
The other question I had, just since the slide is up as well, can you just point out where that emergency exit that was mentioned in the project documents are? Just to call it out. I
Yeah,
know it's
so-
currently proposed as grass pavers, but
Yeah, so between the employee parking area and the ancillary building area, as we call it, there's a pathway between those two.
okay.
So that would be, like you said, like grass pavers, sort of stabilized, vegetated, you know, accessible pathway through there.
Yep.
We'd have a gate, you know, the fire department would have access to it.
Yeah. That is certainly on the Shrewsbury side, so I think they'd have the final say on this point, but the Grafton Fire Department did put a comment saying that they prefer it to be paved rather than grass pavers to ensure maintainability.
Yeah. The question of which fire department will respond here is sort of interesting. The Shrewsbury has a fire station less than a mile away from this, up on Cherry, no, on Centec, not on Cherry Street, it's on Centec, this side of 20.
Yep.
So they would likely be the first responders, but for the portion that's in Grafton, I would expect the Grafton department to probably be responding
I
as
think if
well.
there's a fire
We've
strike,
actually
both.
had joint meetings with both fire departments and both building departments to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of how large valves should be, where boxes should be put, who will respond, and that type of thing. So we will certainly loop all of that back and close the loop again, but we've already started those lines of communication between the departments.
Perfect.
Quickie. Have you been able to estimate the traffic from the MBTA commuter rail area? Because being in Grafton, we have to build more communities because we're on the rail. So we have a lot of apartment complexes coming on board,
Right.
maybe 5 very large ones. And I'm wondering how that's going to impact, they want us to build because they think people are going to ride the rail, so that's the purpose. How much traffic is that going to add, do you think? Because I don't have any idea. And then how will that impact this as well?
It's a very good question. I know that the utilization of public transportation, you know, was down quite a bit during the COVID period. I know my sister-in-law uses this station. I know it's certainly busier now than it has been in the recent past, but it's a valid and good point that you raise. I'm personally aware of several of the residential projects that you mentioned on the Grafton side. You know, I could say that not everyone who would be living in those units, depending on the proximity to the station, may be inclined to use the station, but certainly for 40R, which is at the station, transit-oriented projects, or the Green Street project, which is right across the street, is absolutely going to increase the use of that station. The benefit of those two projects is that they're walkable to the station and wouldn't result necessarily in a vehicular trip being added to the roadways. But there will be some increase from the other further projects, right? And the census data, to my recollection, would say that somewhere around 5% or so of residents would be inclined to use public transportation. So there will be an increase, but not necessarily a remarkable increase in traffic due to it. And I think those types of volumes are accounted for in what we call background traffic growth assumptions, general blanket growth assumptions. So I think they're probably already properly accounted for.
Okay. Prebu, out on the internet somewhere, do you have anything?
I'm good, Bob. Okay.
What's that?
He's awesome. He's good.
He's good.
I said I'm good.
Well, that's good. Okay, you folks are all set for the moment?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, one other thought that
Sure.
crossed my mind. Going back to that near-future residential development at 5 Millennium Drive, it occurs to me that it's conceivable that some residents there might end up walking to work at the UPS facility. So that's, I mean, with the existing conditions of pretty much no residential developments within walking distance, you wouldn't expect any employee pedestrian traffic, but you might want to consider that there's at least a possibility of, I don't know the extent to which you need to, how explicitly you need to take that into account, but it's possible that there may be some pedestrian employee traffic.
It's a great point. I know for the Green Street development, the focus was on pedestrian accommodation, making sure the infrastructure, the crossings were all there. That will, in fact, be the case here as well. There's good sidewalk infrastructure that will connect into the site. So this will be a walkable site as well. So it's a good point.
Something we should think about when we're reviewing the 5 Millennium project as well. Future source of employment nearby.
Okay, are we done?
That's
Okay. Ms. Olson, do you have anything?
Not at this very moment.
Okay. Mr. Rio?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, traffic will be a big issue in as much as you say that it's not adding a lot. I can see the numbers, and Route 20, especially heading west in the evening, can be very, very tough. You mentioned about the Route 20 corridor improvements between Green Street and I guess Northborough Town Line.
Yes.
How does that, I'm sure you may have attended the recent Mass DOT meetings with communities, but in terms of the timeline, how does that kind of match up with your project timeline and the traffic issues? Is it going to kind of match up okay, or one is going to be, if Mass DOT Route 20 corridor improvements are going to be ahead of your project, that's well and good, but I was wondering if
Sure.
there'll be any mismatch in terms of timeline.
Yeah, so my understanding of that project is that it would have initial construction slated for 2026. That's likely a 2-season construction project for substantial completion, so the target completion year would be somewhere around 2028. It doesn't mean it would be entirely completed by then. Those types of projects, because of their scale, often will go into a portion of a third season. This facility would have its initial operations in 2026, but would be phased in over time to where it's at full operating capacity in 2028. So while they're not perfectly aligned, they are on a parallel track, if you will, where some portions of the construction and the infrastructure will be in process, say in 2026/27, and presumably completed in 28 when this is up and running at its fullest capacity. So, those improvements, are not only for vehicular enhancement, but also for pedestrian mobility enhancement. And to a large extent, what that project is trying to do is take the left turn movement out of the equation on Route 20, right? There are roundabouts being proposed and signals that will allow folks to reverse direction without having to make a left turn on an uncontrolled area, right? So from a capacity standpoint, even if those projects, that project is not complete at day one operation, there will be ample capacity for the project at that lower generating scenario while that is being wrapped up.
Yeah. Just a follow-up on the same thing, like, I wish the Route 20 corridor improvements Mass DOT is proposing would extend all the way up to Centec Boulevard, I mean, with the way you explained, it's like from Green Street to east, not west, and that between Green Street and Centec Boulevard is also a big bottleneck with the landfill traffic, and especially in the evening coming heading west, I think that will be tough. So, any improvements your project proposing on that front?
Yeah, the challenge for that central portion of Route 20 is one of who controls the land and what rights folks have to actually make certain improvements. It really is a section of Route 20 that belongs as a public infrastructure project. I mentioned the relative project impact from a volume perspective is about a 2 to 3% change in volume, but about a 10% impact to so-called capacity at that Centec and Route 20 intersection. The near-term improvements will be sufficient to accommodate that capacity impact in combination with the other projects that I mentioned. But there clearly is a need in a longer-term sense to do something physically there by way of additional lanes. And to that extent, the lens that we're looking at this at is to establish a transportation infrastructure fund into which projects individually can contribute meaningfully to advance first the design of what that needs to look like so that state and or federal funds can then be applied as they were to those other two segments. Right? That's precisely the process that was used in those other projects. Get the design, petition for the funds, and then it becomes reality. This project isn't going to change the dial independently, right? But it can be a meaningful part of advancing, say, the designs of those improvements so that you can get to that next step.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more questions later.
Mr. Gugliotti.
On the stormwater control, the total suspended solids and such, who will be monitoring that?
The owner of the site will be required to monitor that indefinitely. There'll be a whole operations and maintenance plan ongoing that will be, tied to the land.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I got a couple of things. Before I forget, are you aware that MassDOT is planning to rebuild the culvert on Centec? And it's going to shut the road down completely when they do it?
We're aware that it has been talked about. The last discussions we had as far as specificity, it was lacking as far as timing and actual commitment to do it with MassDOT in our most recent discussions with them. So it's on the radar, I guess, so to speak.
Well,
certainly want it.
It's probably going to happen in the next couple of years because it has to. So,
right.
But just be aware of it. You referred to the Route 20 master plan, right? So part of the master plan was that part from South Street to Route 9. That was part of it, and so that's been funded. The rest of it, unless something changed that I'm not aware of, is like a master plan put on paper, so it's a roadmap. Part of Market Basket was taken care of through that project. We got a MassWorks grant for that. The rest of it, from my understanding, except for possibly the intersection at Flynn's Truck Stop, which got put off a couple of times because of the Market Basket project and this other thing now with the sewer, that other space in between is it's not even on a long-range tip, right? It's nowhere. So to even think that that is going to help the situation where that road goes 2 lanes, 1 lane in the short term, I don't think it's realistic unless, how do you figure that?
Yep. So you are correct that the master plan looks at a 20-year horizon. It's a much longer growth horizon. We've worked very closely with MassDOT to understand their perspective on how we should be approaching the analysis of this. We've identified a certain growth assumption that is not the 20-year horizon that the master plan was looking at, but really a 7-year horizon that is much more specific to known, approved, or currently proposed projects. And within that narrower band, that 7-year band, we've identified these near-term initiatives that really are going to take a lot of the pressure off, or at least a good part of the pressure off, of how that particular intersection in that central section works. Are those near-term initiatives going to solve the issue of what Route 20 needs? No, they are not. And there's a clear acknowledgement on my part, the developer's part, Mass DOT's part, that more needs to be done to achieve a longer-term solution. The steps to getting that in place really involve first identifying an appropriate design that takes the framework of the master plan and really applies very specific assumptions. We've done that behind the scenes, and yes, there are geometric improvements that would benefit the intersection, but those are well beyond the scope and ability of this individual project to do. They entail land takings and acquisitions.
Right.
And so to answer more succinctly, what we're putting forward here is a kind of a stepped approach to working collaboratively with the town to first get near-term improvements resolved. They need to be resolved independent of this project, frankly. There are literally almost a dozen projects that are cumulatively requiring something to be done. And second, to identify a funding source that could be used to advance that longer-term plan. That first step would most likely involve the design, so that a design could actually be carried to the state to initiate a project initiation form, a PIF,
Yep.
in which funds could be allocated.
Understanding all that, there's still a short-term problem that is not going to be corrected there. I'm not talking about just the intersection. The intersection, I agree with you. The opponent can't take private land. The one-lane, two-lane thing causes considerable backups now. Forget the projects that we know are coming. It's now. So I just want everybody to be realistic about what's going to happen when we add all those trucks onto that road. And you could say they're spread out over time. I know you're around Shrewsbury a lot. You have to be on that road.
Yes.
Evening rush hour in particular is bad. And I'm not saying that's your problem. It's a bigger problem than that. But I had a little sense that it was like, we can do this now, and eventually the other thing's going to happen, and the eventually other thing's going to happen. That part of Route 20 from Route 9 to South Street was in the queue for, I can't remember how long. And the only reason that got, that the money for that got shook loose was because Congressman McGovern was able to get money out of Washington. So maybe we can do that, but without having even close to construction drawings for the rest of Route 20, unless the state wakes up and changes their mind and takes money out of Bob's tip program and leave you with nothing left.
I think I'm already there.
That's going to be a long-term problem because it's going to be a long-term solution. So I don't want to look at this through rose-colored glasses, that's all. And I think for now that's it.
Mr. Chair, I do have a
Yes.
question. Could we speak a little bit to topography and the siting of the building in terms of, I recognize that the building is proposed to be roughly 40 feet, correct? 40.5, whatever. Are we talking about that this is, I also realize that there's some slope considerations in the area, so are you planning to build up? Is it going to be built down in? What is the topo layout here?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
So, in general terms, the site slopes from, it's fairly flat from Centec through kind of this area, if you can see my hand waving there. The first few hundred to 1,000 feet or so
Yeah.
is somewhat flat, and then the high point is kind of in the middle here at that elevation 490, I think I said, and then it starts to drop off quite a bit, about 140 feet or so, towards Summit Brook. And we're trying to balance the site from an earthwork standpoint and from a land disturbance standpoint. So we played with a handful of different elevations at which to put the building so that we could balance the site and limit the amount of import and export that we would have. So long story short, on the plan east side, we're going to be generally cutting into the ground there. And on the plan west side, we'll be filling. And you can kind of see it on this here, the thicker dark line that I'm kind of outlining here on the limit of this paved area.
Yeah.
That's a retaining wall there. So at the highest point, that retaining wall is about 60 feet or so here. And then over in this general area, we have cuts in the ground. I think they're in the range of like 30 to 40 feet. So, with any warehouse type project, the site has to generally be flat, right? So you're kind of like taking, cutting here and filling here and making it all work. I will say too that I mentioned before we thought outside the box in this project with the building. We're actually sloping the building a little bit as well in order to mitigate that existing topography challenge we have. So along the narrow wings, where I mentioned before, the brown package trucks will be inside. The user can slope. We can slope that up to a 1% inside. The main part of the building is going to be level because that's where all their conveyors and sortation devices are. They just can't be on a.
Sure.
But inside here, it's just, package cars loading and unloading. So they can live with a little bit of that cross slope when they're, back up to the docks. So we're actually sloping these wings from plan east to west to make it all work. Okay. And in subsequent meetings, we have this really beautiful color plan that shows, where we're filling and where we're cutting and how much. That we'll have in a future presentation to get a little more in depth on that.
And is the intention then for trying to keep the parking all on that same level, or will there be terraced parking, or what's the?
The parking.
Obviously not for the box trucks, right?
Right. So for the truck parking around the main building, it's not going to be terraced. It will slope with those wings that are sloping at that 1%, and then in this kind of triangular area here south of the building, we have a little bit of flexibility because we're not, we don't need to line up with a dock door along the building. So that will slope from north to south, kind of away from the building at I think it's a 3 or maybe a 4%. We still need to be fairly flat because it is where driving and parking tractor trailers, but we are pitching away and making up multiple feet of grade there to limit wall heights and things like that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other board members?
I just wanted to, I heard at the beginning, we were talking about waiving or giving relief on height, and there was talk of 40.5, but then more recently I heard average was 40.5, and I want to know what the greatest height is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We'll be able to walk through the entirety of the facade of the building and show height all the way along.
Anyone else? No? Ms. Coughlin, you have anything on that? Mr. McGolrick?
Nothing this evening.
Okay. So this is a public hearing. Obviously, for the people in the audience, you note that we don't have a lot of information. So I think questions are going to probably have to be high level because that's the best we're going to get. But does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make tonight? Oh, yes, ma'am. Could you come up?
May I approach? Thank
Yes,
you.
please.
Good evening. My name is Angela Achu. I'm a longtime resident in North Grafton. I'm proud to say that my family has lived in Shrewsbury and North Grafton for more than 100 years. I am a proud resident at 30 Nelson Street. This property has been in my family for the past 70 years. On that street, many of my family, great aunts, great uncles, cousins, relatives live. As a child, I'm 49 years of age. As a child, there's a pond right behind our home. It's known as Windle Pond. Little Bummett Brook is something we're familiar with. Big Bummett Brook is something we're familiar with. Fishing and swimming were pastimes of the earlier generations in my family. But I'm a child of the 70s. And right up the road from Nelson Street is the UPS facility, the existing one that we've talked about tonight. I absolutely agree with the gentleman. I have never seen a dirty UPS truck. In that pond, we have seen plenty of fuel oil. We have seen plenty of chemical runoff. And the Clean Water Act came into effect in 1972. It took a long, long time, when I say long, decades, to see the rivers and to see that pond clean, where you could see fish and wildlife come back, where children could go to play, where their dogs could go with them, and you didn't have to worry about coming back home and having your parents hose you off with the garden hose because you smelled of fuel oil. Not only you, but your golden retriever and the neighborhood kids. Not only were you washing dog poop because we didn't have the pooper scooper, but you were washing dog poop and fuel oil and chemicals off of your bodies. Again, child of the 70s. Made my way here through school, locally here, went on to the University of Vermont, came back and noticed some changes in the 90s, started to see some slight improvements with our water. We consider this our backyard. And with that, I think that it's very important for the board to take into consideration. We've heard a lot about traffic. Traffic is one element, but this is a wildlife corridor. Shrewsbury ranks 295 out of 351 municipalities here in Massachusetts of caring for preserving its open space, its land. Grafton, why we have these height restrictions? Because we've enjoyed being a community, being residential, not having warehouses in our backyards, not having light pollution. But we do know the direct benefits, and we do know some of the challenges that come with development. 1,000 jobs. I'm not aware of Grafton looking for unskilled labor. One of the first jobs that I applied for as a teenager was at the UPS facility. Quickly learned from the truck drivers where they park their trucks to idle during the holiday seasons to burn and waste time so that they can have some breaks in between dropping off their packages. I lasted a day on that job because I found their practices to be quite unethical. Eddie Flynn, who owns the Flynn Truck Stop, there have been many conversations with this. The truck washing bays, we've heard about that tonight. It takes 250 to 300 gallons of water to wash a truck, depending on the length of the truck. We need more information. This area here, this is just literally mowing down. It must be tens of thousands of trees and water bodies. When you say build it all here in Grafton, don't build it in my backyard. It can't be in your backyard to say, come build it all in Grafton. When you say bring it all, build it all here, we're not just industrial, we're residents. We have a right to live and to have clean, open space around us. We are entitled to know more about this, to hear about the topography. I think what's being presented here is definitely skewed from those of us who have traveled in this territory, from those of us who have hunted in these areas. So to see this type of a facility being proposed when we have UPS right nearby, and to see this type of a facility coming right into the backyards and hearing the exceptions of wanting to go up on building height and hearing about a 7,000 pocket. It's all these little quiet, the voices drop when it's presented, little quiet asks. I just want to be clear that those of us who live in the neighborhoods, those of us who will be impacted by the carbon and by the fuel, and when we hear about the 60% and the 90%, we're talking about polluting the existing bodies of water. We're not talking about removing everything when they're talking about the solids and the particles. We've all heard about PFAS. We've all heard about the problems with phosphorus and nitrogen in our waters. This here is another area that I look at going back to where we were in the 60s and 70s and taking something that through some careful efforts has improved the water to now bringing it to a situation where we're talking about polluting it and polluting back to the neighbors who don't deserve this, don't need it. And I'm not aware of anyone in my neighborhood being unemployed or looking for a job at UPS. I'd love to know how many of the 1,000 jobs require a college degree. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, did you want to make a comment?
My name is Craig Sinkis. I live at 28 Nelson Street. It's my neighbor. We all kind of grew up in that same spot. The problems I have here, these gentlemen sitting here with saying that we going to try and satisfy the water problem. What does try mean? I mean, what you're maybe going to be able to satisfy. Then another gentleman's talking about the traffic. Well, he doesn't live here, nor does he give an answer to anything. All you're saying is, oh, this is workable, isn't it? This area is workable. We can do this and get this done. We live here. It's already a mess. And I walk in those woods out there. It's exactly like she says. It's a beautiful place. And do any one of you four live next to one of these facilities?
Sir, direct your comments to me, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Do any one of you four live next to one of these facilities? Raise your hand if you do. So you could tell me what it's like when you hear a diesel engine start up at 3 o'clock in the morning and to wake the kids up. I do, you know, when you go in fishing in the morning and stuff and you drive by UPS and you hear these big things starting up over there, I go, I'm glad I don't live next to that. I understand that there's growth in this nation and everything else and stuff, but there are better places to put it than in a neighborhood. And, you know, your words are what they are. You're there to satisfy your business. And if you don't, you're not going to have a job. You know, and you're going to sit here and you're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But I hope there's enough of us to push you guys back, sorry again, that we can keep our neighborhood. When you've got the Mass Pike coming in with trailer trucks, nobody has mentioned Bridge Street. Bridge Street coming there in front of Washington Mills. You ever see the trailer trucks trying to come around that corner? Have you ever stood there?
We're not anywhere near Bridge Street. We're talking about this project, so let's try to keep it here, okay?
One of the ways, Turnpike.
But those trailer trucks are going to move from everywhere. They're going to come from the Mass Pike.
I understand that.
You got 122, you've got 140, you've got Route 9, and it all clusters into this area. And it's tough. You were speaking about that Route 20 from 2 lanes to 1 lane. And if you're ever down there at that Route 30, that turn, and you got people going through there while the trailer trucks are trying to, and we're all trying to back up to let the trailer trucks through. For what we have now, not hundreds more, but what we have now is just too much.
I think there's going to be plenty of time for public comment on when we see more details of the plan. So it's going to be at least, what, 5 hearings? So
All right.
not every, they're going to deal with different topics so we can handle them, but you'll have plenty of opportunity. The only thing I would remind you is, and I'm not advocating for this or not, right? I'm not advocating for this project, but a property owner, as long as they meet the requirements of the law, has the right to develop their property. And they own the property and they make a proposal, as long as they meet the criteria for the zoning and the other regulations, then they have the right to do that, whether we like it or not.
I understand all of that.
I hear what you're saying because I grew up here and there was a heck of a lot more open space than there is now, but I didn't own all the property. So I think your input as the process goes along will help. If you're concerned about what's happening with the stormwater and that, I encourage you to, present your thoughts, because we do listen to you.
No, I know.
We can't
I've
always
been to
do.
meetings.
Well, no, sometimes people think that because we sit here and we don't get in a dialogue that we're not listening. We listen and we do what we can, but I wish we had the power on this board that people think we do, but we don't.
No.
So I would say come back to the hearings. Information, I would imagine, is going to be on your website also, if it's not already on.
Yes, everything is on our website.
And on the Shrewsbury website, it's on, right?
Yep.
What we have so far is on, so you can take a look at it, you get a better understanding of what's happening. For better or for worse, but at least you'll be
Right.
able to see the information.
Yeah, it was getting worse sitting here when all of a sudden they're talking about washing trucks next to this pond, this waterway. Is there ever human error built in? That's the part that bothers me, the day that all of a sudden this stuff dumps into the pond. Just like they've had the problem with Lake Quinsigamon last year where the sewage went in. It's all from different little human error things because where we put things so close to waterways. And why you can't use some of these waterways. They even closed Lake Quinsigamon last week for swimming in that.
Yeah.
And it's
No,
because of,
Lake Quinsigamon's a problem, but
right.
again, I think if they get into particulars of the truck wash and stuff, they certainly have the opportunity to see what they're talking about and, specifically, and you can ask questions about how they're handling the water. That's the whole point of these hearings, so.
I would also recommend that you pay attention to the Conservation Commission hearings on this, because the Conservation Commission, their focus is going to be on impacts to wetlands, water bodies, and
Right.
many of the things that you've expressed a concern
Because
about.
the last time somebody was going to build back there, they were going to come out Windle Ave and put a bridge over, and I asked the engineer, I says, where that bridge is going right in the water. I says to him, have you ever walked back there and even seen it? Did you know there's water? What water? And that was the point that frightened me with that gentleman. He was up there with a pencil drawing on an easel.
Yeah, let me just reiterate that the Grafton Conservation Commission will be very interested, and that's the ideal place to bring these concerns.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments this evening? Yes, sir.
John Kulik, representing the owners of 15 Centennial Drive. So we're the last driveway on the left as you go up Centennial, where the cul-de-sac is. And I think our only major concerns would be compaction. I don't know about any blasting during construction. Our tenant at 15 Centennial Drive, what their primary business is developing fiber optic cable. So they have very sensitive equipment, and being so close to this humongous site, we have some serious concerns about scheduling, communications, trying to work together. while the construction phase is going on over a few-year period. So it could greatly impact their schedules as far as, meeting their customer requirements as well. And then again, being an adjoining site, the comments mentioned about runoff, stormwater control, and the traffic, again, that'll be posed on that road. It adds a lot of volume to the current number of vehicles that are going up and down that road. But that would be the main thing, is just during the construction, is if we can work and coordinate schedules. And I don't know about blasting. Do you envision a lot of blasting? As you had mentioned, there's some ledge.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Chairman, I think it might make sense for us to take this conversation offline, have a practical kind of nuts and bolts discussion, and we'll certainly.
I just wanted to put it out there as a
touch
general
and
comment.
schedule that
We have
time.
those concerns being so close to the site that
Absolutely.
it's going to be constructed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All fair points.
Thank you.
For you, sir, just real quick, just wanted to call out that I know you're probably far enough away, but the 5 Millennial Drive project we were talking about, our last hearing we had on that, they went over an extensive blasting schedule and information for us, because they are going to be blasting just a little bit on Millennial Drive, that 40R project.
Did you notice any impact, Gary, from that?
They haven't
Hasn't
started
started.
blasting yet. They haven't started blasting.
Oh.
It's still in the permitting phase, but
All
they
right.
were talking about their blasting process and that they would be needing to do that for that project.
Oh, okay. I hadn't really heard about that at all.
They're talking about months
3
of
months
blasting.
Yes.
daily,
Really?
all day, yeah.
This is a different project, though, so just
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're
Di-
staying focused
different
on
project,
this.
just
Yeah.
wanted to.
Project.
All right, so we would like to get more information on who we can talk to about that as well.
I can connect
Yeah.
with the planner.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, okay. Mr. Gold, you have the tentative schedule that's
Yeah, I do. So,
subject to change?
so just to kind of, as we move into the phasing, so the intent, and obviously happy to hear from the boards this evening, but the intent is to move into individual board meetings from here on out. Of course, there I go. So the schedule for us, at least tentatively, is looking at, for Shrewsbury, is looking for July 11th to review civil site grading, stormwater, and lighting. August 1st meeting to be traffic. And then we're holding 2 additional meetings for either an identified topic or just as general discussion. So those next hearings, that would be September 5th and October 3rd. So from there, assuming that all outstanding items have been addressed, we can move into a potential draft decision. But that's the tentative schedule that we have outlined for specific topics. Happy to hear from the board, as Attorney Donahue mentioned, if there's other specific areas that we'd like to focus in on and have a specific meeting dedicated to, or adjust that schedule in any way.
Chris, did you say that there is a sound study being done as well?
So I believe Attorney Donahue alluded to the sound study will be conducted, so.
So is it possible, similar to what we've seen with the Clinton Street project, to do, I think we did traffic and sound together? I don't know if that makes sense, or if that's...
I think some of that might just be timing as far as when our report comes in, when you choose your peer consultant, whether they have time during July to look at it. If it's not the August meeting, it'll be the September meeting.
Okay.
So we'll get to it either one.
Fair, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Just ask.
Well, I think we'll be coordinating through Fiona. What all we need is, in our process, request for a continuation, and we have a form that you sign that requests it, and then we grant the continuation. Hopefully, someone has an idea of what date we want to talk about.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so we're following a very similar format to Shrewsbury. We're following a very similar format to Shrewsbury's board, covering the same topics around the same timeframes. Obviously, we're going to craft it around our meeting schedule. So floated the idea of talking about civil site grading, stormwater and lighting on the 22nd of July. The traffic discussion on the 12th of August, September 9th for other identified general discussion topics, probably sound and fiscal impact, et cetera. And then lastly, October 7th.
Well,
So within a week.
all I want to do is, we can set schedules.
Yep.
But I just need to know, you're talking about July 22nd, Monday, July 22nd?
Yeah, I floated that for consideration. It's not set in stone, but it's just a suggestion to align with what Shrewsbury's timeline is. So
Works for us.
obviously, we can work on it.
If it works for you and if it works for us, we'll do it.
Yeah, and that'll be in Grafton.
Yep, the rest of the meetings will be in Grafton.
Okay. If that's what you want to do, at least for us, ask for continuation to July 22nd.
Sure.
And she,
Okay, while they're doing that,
Yeah, so we, while they're doing that, we similarly would do a continuance, so we'll need a motion and vote to move the hearing, and we would be going to our July 11th meeting date
7 PM.
at 7 PM in this room.
I'll make
Chris,
a,
just a question. So the meeting dates you indicated are all our regularly planned planning board meetings, right? Not
Correct, and-
Okay.
Correct, and what I'll do, just, I know we kind of threw out those dates, and those following, may not have caught all of those.
Okay.
I'll work with Fiona, and we'll put those dates in a more formal setting, and put that on our web pages as well, so interested residents can follow either or both processes as they move forward.
I still think we need to talk about a more coordinated effort, because I just don't see how this is going to work.
Happy to have that conversation as well.
But anyways, at least we got something to start on now.
Yeah.
And Ms. Donahue, you'll probably, on the 11th, want to take a tent or something, so you can, just camp out in the back after you're done, because you're going to be here for a long
A few
time.
people I'd rather spend a day in July with.
I'm sure. Okay, do we have any other new business? Any old
I'll
business?
make a motion to continue this public hearing
Okay, we can do
until the July 11th meeting at 7 PM.
Second.
Okay, motion is second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, so voted, and one recused. Okay. New business, old business?
we should do ours.
Sure, go ahead.
We need to do.
We need to do our continuation.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
No, go ahead.
Right. I'll make a motion that the
grant.
board grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday, July 22nd, 2024 at 7:30 PM.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none.
All right, Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
I vote aye. Mrs. Bresnahan.
Aye.
Mr. Veckatraman.
Aye.
And Mr. Hassinger.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We'll see you then.
Great. Thank you both for your time.
Do we need anything else we have to?
So the other items on the agenda, we have new business, old business. I have nothing this evening. Correspondence, we do have one email that was received and is available on the website as well.
We just note that we received the thing, the email from Charlene Martin, 27 Orchard Meadow Drive regarding this. Okay, so noted.
Make a motion
We
to
need
adjourn.
motions to adjourn.
Second.
You gotta adjourn your board, we can adjourn our board.
So, yeah, so.
You need a
let's-
motion and I don't know when you.
We just did it.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, so voted. We are adjourned. Good evening.
I move our meeting be adjourned.
Second.
Moved and seconded. It's not debatable.
Aye.
Ms. Bresnahan. I vote aye. Mr. Veckatraman.
I learned that long. No,
I heard aye. Mr. Hassinger.
Bob. Vote aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. I'm sure it was unanimous.
It was.
Sounded like it to me.
Yes, it was.